Cops trashed an old veteran's bag at security, mocking him, calling him a fake, and scattering his belongings across the cold courthouse floor. But the moment they saw what was inside, everything changed. Their laughter stopped. The room fell silent. Behind that threadbare jacket and battered canvas bag was a story no one expected, one that shook even the toughest officers to their core. What was hidden inside that bag, and why did it leave them speechless in front of everyone? Before we dive into today's story, I'd love to know where you are watching from. Seeing your comments really reminds me why I do this every day. Fletcher Hawkins stood in line at the federal courthouse security checkpoint, his weathered hands gripping a worn canvas bag. The morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows caught the dust motes dancing around him, making his threadbare military jacket look even more faded than it was. At 67 years old, he still maintained the straight-backed posture of a soldier, though time and old injuries had left him with a slight stoop and a barely noticeable limp. The line moved slowly as people filtered through the metal detector, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Two security officers manned the checkpoint, one tall and lean with a permanent scowl, the other shorter and younger, shifting uncomfortably as he watched his partner work. "Next," barked the taller officer, whose nameplate read Paulson. His cold eyes swept over Fletcher's worn clothing and military jacket with obvious disdain. "Empty your pockets into the tray." Fletcher complied without comment, his movements precise and deliberate as he placed his keys and wallet in the gray plastic bin. The younger officer, Walsh, gave him an apologetic half-smile that quickly disappeared under Paulson's sharp glance. "Through the detector," Paulson commanded, gesturing impatiently. Fletcher stepped through, and immediately the machine erupted in a shrill beep. Paulson's face twisted into something between a sneer and a smile. "Arms out to the sides," he ordered, though Fletcher had already assumed the position with the weary familiarity of someone who'd been through this routine countless times before. "Got yourself a regular here, Kevin?" Paulson called to his partner as he began an unnecessarily aggressive pat-down. "Another vet looking for a warm place to spend the day, I bet." He emphasized the word vet with unmistakable contempt. Fletcher remained silent, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. His eyes focused straight ahead, seeing past the marble walls to places and times these officers couldn't imagine. Walsh fidgeted with his equipment, clearly uncomfortable with his partner's behavior but unwilling to intervene. "What's in the bag?" Paulson demanded, pointing to Fletcher's canvas bag. "Personal items," Fletcher replied quietly, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone used to command. "Nothing dangerous." "I'll be the judge of that." Paulson snatched the bag from Fletcher's grasp. "Probably full of food and God knows what else. You people think you can just camp out here all day." Fletcher's weathered hands tightened slightly at his sides, but his face remained composed. "Sir, I have an appointment upstairs. I'd appreciate—" "An appointment?" Paulson's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Sure you do. Arms up higher." Walsh cleared his throat. "Derek, maybe we should—" "Do your job, Kevin," Paulson snapped, beginning to unzip the canvas bag. "These guys come in here all the time, thinking their service gives them special privileges. My brother served too, and look where it got him." Fletcher's eyes softened slightly at those words, recognizing the pain beneath the hostility. He'd heard that tone before, seen that particular kind of anger in the faces of too many grieving family members. Paulson upended the bag over the metal table, his movements deliberately rough. "Let's see what we've got here, shall we?" The contents of Fletcher's bag began to spill out, and he watched with the same quiet composure he'd maintained throughout the encounter. His patience seemed to only further irritate Paulson, whose hands shook slightly as he prepared to scatter the bag's contents across the security station. Walsh looked between the two men, one radiating quiet dignity despite his worn appearance, the other barely containing his inexplicable rage. The morning sunlight continued to stream through the windows, highlighting the dust disturbed by their conflict, as the rest of the courthouse lobby bustled around them, oblivious to the drama unfolding at the security checkpoint. The tension in the air was palpable as Paulson held the bag higher, ready to dump everything onto the table. Fletcher stood perfectly still, his eyes never leaving his belongings, while Walsh shifted his weight from foot to foot, caught between duty and conscience. The moment stretched out, heavy with unspoken words and barely contained emotions, as Paulson prepared to complete his display of authority. Paulson turned the canvas bag upside down, shaking it violently. The contents scattered across the polished floor with a series of metallic clinks and soft thuds. Small objects skittered in every direction as an envelope and several photographs fluttered down like autumn leaves. "Well, well," Paulson sneered, kicking at what looked like twisted pieces of metal. "Collecting scrap, are we? This your big military collection?" He nudged a titanium fragment with his boot, not recognizing it as shrapnel from the firefight that had earned Fletcher his highest honors. Fletcher's face remained composed, though his eyes followed each item as it rolled across the floor. 23 faces stared up from scattered photographs, young soldiers whose lives he'd saved during Operation Silent Thunder. Their images, carefully preserved for decades, now lay strewn beneath strangers' feet. A few feet away, Evelyn Moore stood frozen, her legal briefcase clutched to her chest. The young public defender had been heading to her morning appointments when the commotion caught her attention. Her wire-rimmed glasses couldn't hide the shock in her eyes as she watched the scene unfold. "Look at this stuff," Paulson continued, picking up a weathered envelope bearing a presidential seal. "Nice property. Did you make this yourself?" He waved it mockingly before dropping it to join the rest of the scattered items. Fletcher slowly knelt to gather his belongings, his movements deliberate and dignified despite his slight limp. His weathered hands moved carefully over each object, treating them with the reverence they deserved. These weren't just mementos. They were pieces of history, fragments of valor, memories of brothers in arms. "Stay where you are," Paulson barked. "I'm not done inspecting these items." Walsh shifted uncomfortably behind the security desk. "Derek, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Kevin." Paulson's voice carried an edge of barely controlled anger. "I'm sick of these guys coming in here playing hero. My brother didn't come home with a bag full of souvenirs. He didn't come home at all." Fletcher's hands paused over a particular photograph that had landed face down. With infinite care, he turned it over, revealing the image of a young soldier with a bright smile and eager eyes. The corner was worn smooth from years of handling. He slipped this photo into his jacket pocket before Paulson could grab it, a subtle movement that spoke of long practice, protecting what was precious. Evelyn took a step forward, her legal training warring with her instinct to intervene. She watched as Fletcher methodically gathered the titanium fragments, pieces of the helicopter he'd piloted through enemy fire to rescue his stranded men. Each jagged piece represented a moment of courage that only he fully understood. "Real heroes don't need to carry around proof," Paulson spat, but his voice wavered slightly as he watched Fletcher's careful movements. Something about the old veteran's quiet dignity seemed to fuel his anger even further. They don't show up looking like homeless bums either. The presidential letter lay crumpled near Fletcher's foot. Its official language was barely visible, but the words Medal of Honor and Extraordinary Valor could be seen among the formal text. Fletcher picked it up with the same care he'd shown everything else, smoothing it gently before adding it to the small pile he'd gathered. More photographs lay scattered, some in color, others in fading black and white. 23 faces, 23 lives, 23 families who still had their sons, brothers, and fathers because of actions Fletcher had never bragged about. He gathered each one as if collecting precious gems, his expression never changing despite Paulson's continued taunts. "You got a permit for all this junk?" Paulson demanded, his voice growing louder as Fletcher's silence seemed to unnerve him. "Because I can have you removed." "Officer Paulson." Evelyn's clear voice cut through his tirade. She'd finally found her voice, though her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her briefcase. I believe this gentleman said he has an appointment upstairs? Fletcher continued gathering his belongings, neither accepting nor rejecting her intervention. His focus remained on the task at hand, particularly on protecting the photographs from further damage. Each image disappeared into his bag with practiced care, each piece of shrapnel wrapped carefully in a handkerchief before joining them. The morning sun continued to stream through the courthouse windows, catching dust motes disturbed by the conflict. The lobby's normal bustle had quieted somewhat, other visitors giving the security checkpoint a wide berth. Through it all, Fletcher maintained his dignified silence, his movements precise and respectful as he recovered each scattered piece of his past. The photograph in his jacket pocket seemed to weigh heavily against his heart, one young face among 23, one story among many that he carried. His fingers brushed against it briefly as he straightened up, ensuring it was secure. Some memories needed to be kept closer than others, protected from those who couldn't understand their true value. Evelyn stepped forward, her heels clicking decisively on the polished floor as she knelt beside Fletcher. "Please let me help you with these," she said softly, reaching for a scattered photograph. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up, recognizing the distinctive formal pose of a military portrait. "These medals?" she murmured, carefully gathering several decorations that had rolled near her feet. The morning light caught their polished surfaces, revealing the intricate details of genuine military honors. Her father, a military history buff, had taught her enough to recognize their significance. These are authentic service medals. Fletcher's weathered hands paused briefly as they reached for the same photograph. "Thank you, miss," he said quietly, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone used to command. He shifted his weight, favoring his left leg as he continued gathering his belongings. Evelyn noticed his slight limp and the way his breath caught when he had to reach too far to one side. Yet he moved with purpose, his movements efficient despite the discomfort. Her eyes were drawn to the way he handled one particular photograph, carefully tucking it deeper into his jacket pocket rather than returning it to the bag. "This is completely unacceptable," she said, shooting a sharp glance at Paulson. "I'm Evelyn Moore, a public defender with the courthouse. I can help you file a formal complaint about this treatment. What they're doing is—" "No need, Miss Moore," Fletcher interrupted gently, carefully wrapping another titanium fragment in his handkerchief. "I would just like directions to courtroom 7, if you would be so kind." Paulson snorted from his position behind the security desk. "Yeah, listen to the old man. No complaint necessary." His voice carried a hint of relief beneath the continued hostility. Evelyn felt her face flush with anger. "Officer Paulson, I suggest you consider—" "Please," Fletcher said quietly, touching her arm lightly. "Some battles aren't worth fighting." His eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her pause. Not defeat, but a kind of peace that transcended the petty humiliation he'd just endured. She helped him gather the last few items, noting how carefully he handled each one. The presidential letter, now slightly crumpled, bore an official seal that no street vendor could have forged. As she handed it to him, their fingers brushed, and she felt the strength in his weathered hands. "At least let me show you to courtroom 7, she offered, picking up her briefcase. "It's actually on my way." She wasn't due in court for another hour, but something about this man made her want to ensure he reached his destination safely. Fletcher nodded, adjusting his canvas bag with dignity. "That would be kind of you." He straightened his jacket, the threadbare military coat that had prompted Paulson's initial disdain, with the same care he'd shown his scattered belongings. As they walked toward the elevators, Evelyn found herself matching her pace to his measured steps. "You know," she said carefully, "I see a lot of injustice in my work here. Sometimes a single voice speaking up can make a difference." Fletcher's lips curved in a slight smile. "Sometimes silence speaks louder than words, Miss Moore. Those who need to understand will understand in their own time." They passed through the morning crowd, other courthouse visitors instinctively making way for them. Evelyn noticed how Fletcher acknowledged each person they passed with a slight nod, treating everyone with the same quiet respect regardless of their station. "The young soldier?" she ventured, gesturing toward his jacket pocket where he'd stored the special photograph. "Someone important to you?" Fletcher's hand moved unconsciously to the pocket, his fingers brushing the spot where the photograph rested. "They're all important," he replied softly. "Every single one of them." There was a weight to his words that suggested stories beneath stories, histories that ran deeper than the scattered medals and photographs could reveal. They reached the elevator, and Evelyn pressed the button for the third floor. As they waited, she observed Fletcher's reflection in the polished doors. His straight posture despite the limp, the dignity that seemed to radiate from him despite his worn clothing. She saw what Paulson had missed. This was no ordinary homeless veteran seeking shelter, but a man who carried his honor as quietly as he carried his wounds. "Courtroom 7 is just down the hall to the right," she said, as the elevator doors opened. "I can walk you?" "You've done more than enough, Miss Moore," Fletcher interrupted gently. "Thank you for your kindness." He adjusted his canvas bag once more and stepped out of the elevator with measured steps, his limp barely noticeable through sheer force of will. Evelyn watched him move down the hallway, noticing how other people unconsciously straightened as he passed. Despite his worn clothes and the humiliation he'd just endured, he moved with an innate authority that commanded respect. She found herself wondering about the stories behind each photograph, each medal, each carefully preserved fragment in his bag. As she turned toward her own destination, she felt a familiar fire kindling inside her, the same determination that had driven her to become a public defender. Sometimes justice needed a voice, even when those most deserving of it chose to remain silent. The wood-paneled walls of Courtroom 7 seemed to hold their breath as Judge Martin Reeves adjusted his reading glasses. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The judge's silver hair caught the sunlight as he straightened a folder marked "Classified" on the bench before him. "Today we gather to right a wrong that has persisted for far too long," Judge Reeves began, his voice carrying the weight of both judicial authority and personal conviction. "Colonel Fletcher Hawkins, please approach the bench." Fletcher rose slowly from his seat, his military bearing evident despite his worn clothing and slight limp. The same canvas bag that security had ransacked earlier sat carefully placed beside his chair. "For those present, what I'm about to share has remained classified for decades under Operation Silent Thunder," Judge Reeves continued. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the folder. "But today, with presidential authorization, we can finally tell the full story of what happened on April 15th, 20 years ago." The judge's voice grew thick with emotion. A special operations helicopter carrying 23 soldiers was shot down behind enemy lines in Afghanistan. The aircraft was carrying vital intelligence and wounded personnel. Enemy forces immediately surrounded the crash site. Fletcher stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the judge's bench, as if seeing that distant battlefield materialize before him. Colonel Hawkins, then commanding a nearby forward operating base, received the distress call. Judge Reeves paused, removing his glasses to wipe them. What happened next defies explanation. Despite heavy enemy fire and orders to wait for reinforcements, Colonel Hawkins personally led a rescue operation. The judge's voice grew stronger as he described the scene. The helicopter had crashed in a narrow valley. Enemy forces held the high ground on both sides. The wreckage was burning. Intelligence suggested all souls were lost. He looked directly at Fletcher. "But you knew better, didn't you, Colonel?" Fletcher's weathered hands clasped behind his back, his only response a slight tightening around his eyes. "The official record shows that Colonel Hawkins made 23 separate trips into that burning wreckage," Judge Reeves continued, "each time under intense enemy fire, each time carrying out a wounded soldier. The medical report documented third-degree burns on his hands and shoulders, a bullet wound to his left leg, shrapnel wounds across his back." The courtroom remained absolutely silent. Even the usual shuffle of papers and whispered conversations had ceased. The first soldier he rescued was the pilot, unconscious and trapped in the cockpit. The second was the navigator, with 2 broken legs. Judge Reeves consulted his papers. The 3rd through 20th were wounded special operations personnel, many of whom would not have survived another 10 minutes in that inferno. Fletcher's stance hadn't changed, but a muscle worked in his jaw as the judge continued. The 21st and 22nd were intelligence officers carrying vital documents. Judge Reeves's voice cracked slightly. And the 23rd? He paused, removing his glasses again. The 23rd was a young lieutenant who had been thrown clear of the wreckage, a lieutenant who would later become a judge, standing here today to ensure this hero finally receives the recognition he deserves. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Judge Reeves gripped the edge of his bench, no longer attempting to maintain judicial detachment. I was that 23rd soldier, Colonel Hawkins. I never saw your face through the smoke and flames. By the time I regained consciousness in the field hospital, you had been evacuated for your own injuries. But I never forgot the hands that pulled me to safety, or the voice that kept saying, "I've got you, son. You're going home." Fletcher's composure wavered for the first time, his eyes meeting the judge's. The Medal of Honor citation was approved immediately, Judge Reeves continued. But due to the classified nature of the operation and subsequent political complications, the presentation was delayed. Year after year, the file gathered dust while you never spoke a word about your actions, never demanded recognition. The judge straightened, his voice gaining strength. When I saw your name on today's docket, I knew the time had finally come. The president has personally authorized this ceremony. He gestured to an aide who stepped forward carrying a polished wooden box. Colonel Fletcher Hawkins, your country has not forgotten. Your fellow soldiers have not forgotten. And I, his voice broke slightly, I certainly have not forgotten. The morning sun streaming through the courthouse windows seemed to grow brighter, illuminating Fletcher's face as he stood at attention. The same quiet dignity he had shown during the security checkpoint. Humiliation now transformed into something magnificent by the weight of truth finally spoken aloud. Judge Reeves cleared his throat, his eyes moving to the back of the courtroom. But I wasn't the only one you saved that day, Colonel Hawkins. There's someone else here who's waited a very long time to thank you properly. Heavy footsteps echoed through the courtroom. A stocky man in a Chicago Police Department uniform strode down the center aisle, his badge gleaming under the morning light. Detective Oliver Torres's usual fierce expression had crumbled, tears already streaming down his face. Fletcher turned slowly, his eyes falling on the approaching officer. His weathered hands trembled as he reached for the protected photograph he'd been carrying. The same one he'd shielded so carefully during the security checkpoint incident. He held it up, looking back and forth between the image and the man before him. "Private Torres," Fletcher whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You were just 19 years old." Detective Torres stopped a few feet from Fletcher, his broad shoulders shaking. "You remembered," he managed to say through his tears. "All these years, you kept my picture." Fletcher nodded, carefully unfolding the aged photograph. It showed a young soldier in desert camouflage, barely more than a boy, grinning at the camera with all the innocent confidence of youth. "I kept all 23, he said softly. "But yours was special. You were so young, too young to die in that valley." Torres stepped forward and, without warning, wrapped his arms around the older man in a fierce embrace. "I never knew your name," he sobbed against Fletcher's shoulder. "They wouldn't tell us anything about the operation, but I never forgot your voice. You kept talking to me the whole way out, even with the bullets flying everywhere." Fletcher's composed demeanor finally broke. He hugged Torres back, his own tears falling freely now. "You were pinned under the tail section," he recalled, his voice thick with memory. "Kept saying you didn't want to die." that your mama was waiting for you back home. You told me I wasn't going to die? Torres pulled back slightly, wiping his eyes. You said, "Not today, son. You've got too much living left to do." Then you lifted that medal like it was nothing, even though your hands were already burned raw from the previous rescues. The courtroom remained silent, bearing witness to this powerful reunion. Judge Reeves dabbed at his own eyes with a handkerchief. After I recovered, Torres continued, straightening his police uniform, I knew I had to do something meaningful with the life you saved. I became a cop because of you, sir. Every time I put on this badge, I think about how you risked everything to save a scared kid you didn't even know. Fletcher's eyes crinkled with pride as he looked at Torres's badge. You've done good, son, more than good. I protect people now, Torres said firmly. I try to show them the same kindness and courage you showed me. When things get tough on the job, I remember how you kept going back into that wreckage, again and again, no matter how bad you were hurt. Fletcher glanced down at the photograph still in his hands. I kept this to remind myself, he said quietly. On the hard days, when the memories get dark, I look at your young face and remember why it was all worth it. 23 lives, 23 futures. Torres gently touched the photograph. May I? Fletcher handed it to him, and the detective studied his younger self with wonder. I was just a kid, he whispered, but you saw something worth saving. I saw what you could become, Fletcher replied, looking at Torres's uniform with approval, and I was right. Torres carefully returned the photograph, then stood at attention and rendered a precise military salute. Thank you for my life, Colonel Hawkins. I've waited 20 years to say those words. Fletcher returned the salute with perfect form, his weathered hand steady at his brow. Thank you for making it count, Detective Torres. The two men embraced again, and Torres whispered something that only Fletcher could hear. The older man's eyes welled up with fresh tears as he nodded in response. Judge Reeves watched the scene unfold, the Medal of Honor box still waiting on his bench. But this moment, this reunion between hero and saved soldier, spoke more about valor and its lasting impact than any medal ever could. In the morning light of Courtroom 7, past and present merged as 20 years of gratitude finally found its voice. Paulson, Walsh, my office now. Security Supervisor Martinez's voice crackled over their radios, making both officers jump. Derek Paulson's stomach tightened as he and Kevin Walsh made their way to the supervisor's office. The usual morning quiet of the courthouse had been replaced by an unusual buzz of activity. News vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky. What's going on? Walsh whispered, tugging nervously at his collar. Before Paulson could respond, they rounded the corner and froze. The marble hallway was packed with people. Decorated military officers in full-dress uniforms, television crews setting up cameras, and what looked like an entire precinct of Chicago Police Department officers in their formal blues. Martinez stood waiting at her office door, her expression stone cold. Inside, she ordered. Both of you. Through the office window, Paulson watched more people filing into the building. His throat went dry as he recognized several high-ranking military officials, their chests heavy with medals. Walsh shifted uncomfortably beside him. Would either of you care to explain what happened this morning with Colonel Fletcher Hawkins? Martinez's voice was deadly quiet. Paulson's face went pale. Colonel? He managed to croak. Yes, Colonel, Martinez said, slapping a morning newspaper on her desk. Medal of Honor, recipient Colonel Fletcher Hawkins, whose classified operation saved 23 American soldiers. The same man whose belongings you scattered across my lobby floor this morning. Walsh looked like he might be sick. We didn't know. Exactly. You didn't know, Martinez cut him off. And now the media's gotten wind of how 2 courthouse security officers harassed and humiliated an American hero on the very morning he's scheduled to receive formal recognition. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they watched as Detective Oliver Torres led a group of police officers through the security checkpoint. The same checkpoint where hours earlier, they had dumped Colonel Hawkins's belongings. "That's not even the worst part," Martinez continued. "Judge Reeves himself called me. He served under Colonel Hawkins as a lieutenant. Do you have any idea the position you've put this courthouse in?" Paulson's customary scowl had vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror. "I need to apologize," he said quietly. "Oh, you'll get your chance," Martinez replied, "because you're both going to witness the ceremony. Front row. I want you to see exactly who you disrespected today." They were led to courtroom 7, which was now packed to capacity. Television cameras lined the back wall. Paulson and Walsh were seated in the front row, directly behind where Colonel Hawkins stood at attention. Judge Reeves entered, his judicial robes replaced by his old military uniform. The sight of the federal judge in lieutenant's bars made Paulson sink lower in his seat. 20 years ago, Judge Reeves began, his voice carrying through the hushed courtroom, "I served under then Major Fletcher Hawkins. What I witnessed during Operation Silent Thunder has haunted me ever since, both the horror of combat and the extraordinary courage of one man who refused to leave anyone behind." Paulson watched as Detective Torres, sitting nearby with his fellow officers, wiped tears from his eyes. The morning's events began replaying in Paulson's mind. The cruel jokes, the scattered photographs, the quiet dignity with which Colonel Hawkins had endured their abuse. 23 times, Colonel Hawkins entered that burning wreckage, Judge Reeves continued. 23 times, he emerged carrying another soldier to safety. His hands were burned to the bone, his own injuries severe, but he wouldn't stop, couldn't stop. Not while there was still one more life to save. Walsh was openly crying now. Paulson felt his own eyes stinging as he remembered mocking the old soldier's limp. The same limp, he now realized, that came from saving those 23 lives. "It is my profound honor," Judge Reeves said, his voice thick with emotion, "to finally present Colonel Fletcher Hawkins with our nation's highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor." The entire courtroom rose as Judge Reeves placed the medal around Colonel Hawkins's neck. Detective Torres and his fellow officers snapped to attention, rendering a precise salute. Military officials, courthouse staff, and media crews alike wiped away tears as Colonel Hawkins stood tall, somehow looking both humble and magnificent at once. Paulson could barely breathe. The weight of his morning's actions crashed over him as he watched the man he had humiliated receive America's highest honor. He thought of his own brother, lost in Iraq, and how he had twisted that grief into bitterness against all veterans. Now, watching Colonel Hawkins stand before them with quiet grace, Paulson finally understood the true meaning of service and sacrifice. The flashbulbs popped and cameras rolled as Judge Reeves embraced his former commanding officer. Detective Torres stood nearby, pride evident in his bearing as he watched the man who had saved his life finally receive recognition for his heroism. And in the front row, 2 chastened security officers witnessed it all, understanding at last the true cost of their prejudice and the immeasurable worth of the man they had wronged. Evelyn Moore sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen with growing horror. What had started as a simple records request had turned into something far more disturbing. The security footage from the courthouse entrance played before her, showing Derek Paulson's interactions with veterans over the past 6 months. "This can't be coincidental," she muttered, making careful notes. The pattern was clear. Paulson specifically targeted older men wearing military insignia or clothing. She watched as he performed unnecessarily aggressive searches, often palming small items when he thought no one was looking. Her colleague, Tom from IT, had helped her access the archived footage after she filed an official request. "There's more," he said, clicking through different dates. "I've marked the timestamps where it's most obvious." Evelyn leaned forward, watching as Paulson slipped various items into his pocket: a veteran service pin, a commemorative coin, even a small pocket Bible with military insignia. Her stomach turned as she recognized several of the victims, regular visitors to the courthouse whom she had represented. "I need to see his personnel file," Evelyn said, her jaw set with determination. She had spent the afternoon making calls, building a case. What she discovered made her blood run cold. 3 formal complaints had been filed against Paulson in the past year, all by veterans, all mysteriously dropped. Later that evening, Evelyn sat cross-legged on her office floor, surrounded by printouts. Her laptop displayed an online marketplace where she had found listings for military memorabilia, posted by a user named Justice Served Chai. The items matched those she had seen Paulson steal on the security footage. "Got you," she whispered, documenting each listing with screenshots. But it was what she found next that made her pause. Buried in Paulson's personnel file was a notification of bereavement leave from 3 years ago. His younger brother, Private First Class Michael Paulson, had been killed in action in Iraq. Evelyn's phone buzzed. A text from her contact at the Veterans Affairs Office. "Found something interesting about your security officer," it read. "He's been turning away vets with valid court appointments, claiming security concerns. We've had dozens of complaints." The pieces started falling into place. Evelyn pulled up more footage, watching how Paulson's behavior changed when dealing with veterans. The cold eyes, the aggressive stance, the barely contained anger. It wasn't just about theft or power. This was personal. She discovered posts on military forums where Paulson, using the same username as his selling account, blamed senior officers for his brother's death. "They send our boys to die," one comment read, "then come home to parades and medals while our families plan funerals." Evelyn printed everything: the security footage stills, the online listings, the forum posts, the complaint records. She organized them meticulously in a folder, building a case that showed not just individual acts of cruelty, but a systematic campaign of harassment and theft. "This is what grief looks like when it turns toxic," she said to herself, reading through Paulson's increasingly bitter forum posts. The man had never sought counseling after his brother's death. Instead, he had turned his pain into a vendetta against all veterans, using his position of authority to exact revenge on men who reminded him of those he blamed for his loss. The next morning, Evelyn requested an emergency meeting with Chief Judge Martinez and the courthouse administration. She laid out her evidence methodically. 6 months of documented harassment, thousands of dollars in stolen military memorabilia sold online, dozens of veterans wrongfully turned away from their court dates. "This goes beyond one incident," Evelyn explained, her voice firm. "Officer Paulson has been systematically targeting veterans, stealing their possessions, and denying them access to justice, all while profiting from their stolen memories." She played selected clips from the security footage, Schankins, Charny Foding, showing Paulson's pattern of abuse. The administrators watched in silence as veteran after veteran endured his hostile treatment. Then she showed them the online marketplace listings, service medals, challenge coins, and personal mementos taken from those same veterans, all listed for sale. "And here's why," Evelyn said, pulling out the final documents. 3 years ago, Officer Paulson lost his brother in Iraq. Instead of processing that grief, he turned it into a campaign against all veterans. He's not just a corrupt officer. He's a man who needs help, whose unresolved trauma has corrupted his ability to serve the public. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about Colonel Hawkins anymore. This was about dozens of veterans who had suffered smaller but no less real injustices. About a system that had failed to notice one man's pain turning into institutional abuse. What happened to Colonel Hawkins was terrible, Evelyn concluded, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. This courthouse has unknowingly harbored a systematic campaign of discrimination against the very veterans we claim to honor. We need to make this right, not just for Colonel Hawkins, but for every veteran who has walked through those doors. Chief Judge Martinez looked at the evidence spread across her desk, her expression grave. The security footage continued to play silently on the screen, showing Paulson slipping another veteran's memento into his pocket, his face twisted with an anger that finally made sense. The anger of a man who had never learned to heal. Detective Oliver Torres stood in the courthouse hallway, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Through the glass doors, he could see Officer Derek Paulson being escorted to the security office by his supervisor. The sight of the man who had humiliated his rescuer, his hero, made Torres's blood boil. "Detective, please," Evelyn Moore said softly, touching his arm. "We have all the evidence we need for proper channels." "Proper channels?" Torres cut her off, his voice tight with emotion. "That man stole from veterans. He harassed them. He tried to strip the dignity from a Medal of Honor recipient." He shook his head, tears threatening to spill. "From the man who carried me out of that burning helicopter when I was 19 years old." Before Evelyn could respond, Torres pushed through the doors. His police badge gleamed on his belt as he approached the security office. The supervisor saw him coming and stepped aside, recognizing the authority in Torres's stride. Paulson looked up from his chair, his face still set in that permanent scowl. "What do you want?" "What I want," Torres said, his voice deadly quiet, "is to understand how a man sworn to protect and serve could systematically abuse veterans, could steal their memories, could try to humiliate a hero like Colonel Hawkins." "Hero?" Paulson spat the word. "You don't know anything about heroes. My brother was a hero, and where did that get him? A pine box and a folded flag." Torres pulled up a chair and sat directly across from Paulson. His training as a police officer warred with his burning desire to make this man understand the depth of his crimes. "Let me tell you about heroes," Torres said, pulling out his wallet. He removed a worn photograph, identical to the one Fletch had protected during the search. "This was taken right after Colonel Hawkins pulled me from that helicopter. I was a scared 19-year-old kid, bleeding out in the Hindu Kush. He went back into that fire 6 times. 6 times, Officer Paulson." Paulson's scowl wavered slightly as Torres laid the photo on the desk between them. "That man you harassed? He's the reason 23 families didn't receive folded flags. He's the reason I became a police officer, because he showed me what it truly means to protect others." Torres's voice cracked with emotion. "Every time I put on this badge, I try to honor what he did for me." "My brother," Paulson started, but Torres cut him off. "Your brother's death was a tragedy, but it doesn't give you the right to steal from veterans, to sell their memories online, to abuse your authority." Torres leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I've spent 12 years on the force protecting people, following the law. Right now, every fiber of my being wants to make you feel as small as you made Colonel Hawkins feel." Paulson's face flushed red. "You don't understand. They send them off to die. All these decorated officers, these heroes. They send kids like my brother to die in the sand, then come home for their parades and medals. And you think stealing their Purple Hearts makes it right?" Torres's voice rose. "You think selling their memories on the internet brings your brother back?" "Shut up!" Paulson stood suddenly, knocking his chair backward. "You don't get to talk about my brother?" Torres remained seated, his training taking over as Paulson's composure cracked. "Your brother served with honor. Is this how you honor his memory? By becoming the very thing he fought against? By abusing power? By stealing from other soldiers?" The words hit Paulson like physical blows. His face contorted as years of unprocessed grief crashed through his carefully constructed walls of anger. I couldn't save him," he choked out. "I was supposed to protect my little brother, and I couldn't save him." "No, you couldn't," Torres said, his voice softening slightly. "But that pain doesn't give you the right to inflict pain on others. Colonel Hawkins saved my life that day, but you know what he told me later? He said he still dreams about the ones he couldn't save." Paulson sank back into his chair, his anger crumbling into something raw and broken. Torres watched the man's defensive shell crack, revealing the wounded soul beneath. "I'm placing you under arrest," Torres said quietly, standing and removing his handcuffs. "For theft, abuse of authority, and violation of civil rights under color of law. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As Torres recited the Miranda rights, he felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for the way grief could corrupt a person's soul. Paulson offered no resistance as the handcuffs clicked into place, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Detective," Paulson whispered as Torres helped him to his feet, "I never meant. It wasn't supposed to." "I know," Torres replied, guiding him toward the door where other officers waited. "But now you have to face what you've done, and maybe, finally, face what happened to your brother." As Torres finished reading Paulson his rights, the security officer's demeanor suddenly changed. His tears stopped, and his hand darted toward his pocket, pulling out his smartphone. "You can't prove anything," Paulson snarled, his fingers frantically tapping the screen. "All the evidence is right here, and it's about to disappear." Torres's police instincts kicked in. "Stop! That's destruction of evidence!" He lunged forward, reaching for the phone, but Paulson twisted away, desperately trying to delete his online selling history. The two men collided, sending chairs scattering across the small security office. Torres grabbed for Paulson's wrist, but the security officer fought back with unexpected strength born of desperation. They crashed into the desk, papers flying everywhere. "Let go of the phone!" Torres shouted, his earlier composure cracking as rage bubbled up inside him. The memory of Fletch's humiliation, of the scattered medals and photos, fueled his anger. His training told him to use measured force, but his emotions screamed for retribution. Paulson's elbow caught Torres in the ribs, and the detective's restraint snapped. He slammed Paulson against the wall, harder than necessary, his forearm pressing against the security officer's throat. The phone clattered to the floor. "You like hurting people?" Torres growled, pressing harder, like making them feel powerless. All his professional discipline was drowning in a wave of vengeful fury. This wasn't just about the evidence anymore. This was about justice, about punishment. "Detective Torres." A quiet voice cut through the chaos. "That's enough, son." Colonel Fletcher Hawkins stood in the doorway, his tall frame slightly stooped but radiating an unmistakable authority. He limped forward, his weathered hands steady and sure. "He deserves this," Torres said through clenched teeth, not releasing his hold on Paulson. "After what he did to you? To all those veterans?" "What he deserves," Fletch said, moving closer, "is a fair trial, not revenge." He placed a gentle hand on Torres's shoulder. "You're better than this, Oliver. You proved that every day since I pulled you from that helicopter." Torres's grip loosened slightly, and Paulson gasped for air. The security officer's eyes were wide with fear now, darting between Torres and Fletch. "Step aside, son," Fletch said softly. "Let me handle this." Torres hesitated, his body trembling with suppressed rage. Then, slowly, he lowered his arm and backed away. Paulson slumped against the wall, rubbing his throat. But instead of retreating, Paulson made one last desperate move. He dove for his fallen phone, and Torres lunged forward with a shout of anger. In that split second, Fletch moved with the same decisive speed that had saved 23 lives in Afghanistan. The retired colonel stepped between the two younger men, taking the full force of their collision. His bad leg buckled, but he remained standing, one arm holding Torres back while the other steadied Paulson. "Enough!" Fletch's voice carried the same command presence that had guided soldiers through battlefield chaos. "This stops now." Torres froze, seeing his hero once again putting himself in harm's way to protect others, even someone who had wronged him. Paulson too stood motionless, staring at the man he had humiliated just hours before, now shielding him from harm. "Sir," Torres whispered, the anger draining from his body, "I'm sorry. I lost control." "We all carry wounds, Oliver," Fletch said, still standing between them. "Some from war, some from loss." He turned to Paulson. "Your brother's death left a wound that never healed. I understand that pain. I've lost men under my command, but healing doesn't come from inflicting more pain." Paulson's face crumpled, and this time his tears were genuine. "Why?" he choked out. "Why would you protect me after what I did to you?" "Because that's what real heroes do," Fletch replied simply. "They protect everyone, not just those who deserve it." He reached down and picked up the phone, handing it to Torres. "Now, Detective, I believe this is evidence you'll need." Torres took the phone, his hands steady once more. "Yes, sir." He pulled out a fresh pair of handcuffs, his professional demeanor restored. "Mr. Paulson, please, put your hands behind your back." This time, Paulson complied without resistance, his shoulders slumped in defeat and something like understanding. As Torres secured the cuffs, Fletch watched with the same quiet dignity he had shown during his own humiliation hours before. Evelyn Moore appeared in the doorway, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers. She took in the scattered furniture and the 3 men's disheveled appearance with wide eyes. "Everything's under control now," Fletch assured her, his calm presence filling the room. Detective Torres was just completing an arrest. Torres led Paulson toward the door, then paused beside his hero. "Thank you, sir, again, for showing me the right way." Fletch squeezed his shoulder. "You showed me the same thing today, son. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight with ourselves." As the 2 uniformed officers escorted Paulson toward the door, Fletch reached into his jacket pocket. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he withdrew the photograph he had protected so fiercely during the security check. "Before you go," Fletch said quietly, "there's something you should see." Torres paused, and Paulson turned back reluctantly, his handcuffs jingling. Evelyn stepped closer, sensing the weight of the moment. The afternoon sunlight filtering through the office window caught the glossy surface of the photograph as Fletch held it out. "This is the picture you mocked earlier," Fletch said, his voice steady but gentle. "The one you called my fake hero memorabilia." Paulson's face flushed with shame, but he couldn't look away as Fletch turned the photograph toward him. The image showed the interior of a military helicopter, smoke-filled and chaotic. In the center lay an unconscious young soldier, his face barely visible through the blood and grime. "That's Oliver," Fletch explained, his fingers tracing the edge of the photo with reverence. 19 years old, barely breathing when I pulled him out. The medic snapped this picture right after I got him to safety." Torres inhaled sharply, seeing himself in that vulnerable moment for the first time. "Sir, I never knew you had this." Paulson stared at the photograph, his face draining of color as the full impact of his actions began to sink in. The young soldier in the picture could have been his own brother, lying helpless in a war zone. "I've carried this photo every day for 23 years, Fletch continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Not for glory or recognition, but as a reminder." "A reminder of what?" Evelyn asked softly. Fletch's eyes met Paulson's, holding his gaze with unexpected gentleness. "A reminder that service isn't about medals or ceremonies. It's about the lives we touch. Every morning, I look at this picture and remember why it matters, why we put on the uniform, why we risk everything for others." Paulson's legs gave out, and he sank to his knees, the handcuffs catching against his back. "I didn't know," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't want to know. My brother, he died alone. No one could save him." "Your brother wasn't alone," Fletch said, kneeling beside him despite his bad leg. "Someone was with him, trying to save him. Just like I was with Oliver. Someone carried his memory too, just like I carry this photograph." Torres watched the scene unfold. his own eyes filling with tears. "Colonel, I never realized, all these years, you've been carrying that moment with you." "Every day," Fletch nodded, carefully returning the photograph to his pocket. "Because every life matters. Every act of service creates ripples we might never see." "Look at you now, Oliver, a detective protecting and serving others. That's why I carry the photo. To remember that even in our darkest moments, we can make a difference." Paulson broke down completely, his shoulders shaking with sobs. "I've dishonored my brother's memory," he choked out. "Everything I've done, stealing from veterans, humiliating them. I was so angry, so lost in my grief." "Grief can blind us," Fletch said, placing a steady hand on Paulson's shoulder, "but it can also open our eyes to what truly matters. Your brother's sacrifice deserves to be honored not through anger, but through service to others." Evelyn wiped tears from her cheeks as she watched the three men, the decorated hero, the saved soldier, and the broken security officer, sharing a moment of profound understanding. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the office floor, but something lighter seemed to fill the air. "The photograph?" Paulson managed between sobs. "When I scattered your belongings, I could have destroyed it, all that meaning, that memory." "But you didn't," Fletch said firmly. "Sometimes life gives us second chances to understand what we couldn't see before. Your brother's death left a wound in your heart, just like that day in the helicopter left its mark on all of us. But wounds can heal if we let them." Torres stepped forward, his police badge catching the light. "Sir, I need to take him in now." Fletch nodded, struggling slightly as he rose to his feet. "Actions have consequences, Derek," he said to Paulson. "But remembering why service matters, that's the first step toward making things right." Paulson looked up at Fletch through tear-filled eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I know," Fletch replied, his voice full of understanding. "Now honor that feeling by finding a better way to serve." As Torres helped Paulson to his feet, the security officer caught one last glimpse of Fletch's jacket pocket, where the precious photograph rested, a daily reminder of sacrifice, service, and the enduring power of compassion to transform lives. The office fell silent except for Paulson's ragged breathing. His shoulders shook as he struggled to compose himself, the handcuffs still binding his wrists behind his back. "I can't keep carrying this," Paulson said, his voice breaking. "Every time I see a veteran, I see my brother Tommy. He was just 22 when that roadside bomb." He squeezed his eyes shut, tears streaming down his face. "I kept thinking if I could make other veterans hurt like I was hurting, somehow it would make the pain go away." Evelyn watched from near the doorway, her legal pad forgotten in her hands as Paulson's confession poured out. "I started small," he continued, "taking things from their bags during searches, medals, photos, anything that looked valuable. Sold them online. Told myself they deserved it." He looked up at Fletch with anguished eyes, but it never helped. The anger just got worse. Torres shifted uncomfortably, his hand still resting near his handcuffs. "Sir, we should get him processed." "Wait," Fletch said softly, easing himself into a chair across from Paulson. His bad leg trembled slightly from the day's strain. "Tell me about Tommy." Paulson blinked in surprise. "What?" "Your brother. Tell me about him." He was a good kid." Paulson's voice softened. "Always wanted to serve, ever since we were little. Star quarterback in high school, could have gone to college on a scholarship, but he enlisted instead. Said it was his duty." Fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. "I was supposed to protect him. I was the big brother." Fletch nodded slowly. "I served in Iraq too. Same region where we lost Tommy, I expect." "Anbar Province," Paulson whispered. "I thought so." Fletch leaned forward. "I lost men there too, Good soldiers, like your brother. The hardest part wasn't the losing, it was learning to live with the loss. Evelyn stepped closer, drawn by the raw honesty in both men's voices. She watched as Fletch reached into his jacket and withdrew a small business card. "There's a Veterans Counseling Center downtown," Fletch said, placing the card on the desk between them. "Dr. Sarah Martinez specializes in grief counseling for military families. She helped me after I came home." Torres frowned. "Colonel, after what he did?" "What he did was wrong," Fletch agreed. "But I've seen too many good people destroyed by unprocessed grief. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is ask for help." Paulson stared at the card, then back at Fletch. "Why would you help me? After everything I've done?" "Because 30 years ago, in Afghanistan, I helped an enemy soldier who was bleeding out after a firefight," Fletch replied quietly. "He'd been trying to kill my men minutes earlier, but in that moment, all I saw was another human being in pain. Sometimes compassion is the strongest weapon we have." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes as she watched the scene unfold. This was why she'd become a public defender, to find the humanity beneath the surface of broken people. "I won't press charges," Fletch continued, "on one condition: you get help. Real help, not just a single session. Deal with this properly for Tommy's sake." "The theft charges," Evelyn began, but Fletch held up his hand. "I'll make arrangements to recover and return the stolen items," he said, "and ensure the courthouse implements better oversight of security procedures. But pressing charges won't heal what's really broken here." Paulson's body sagged, as if a great weight had been lifted. "I don't deserve this chance." "None of us deserve the chances we get," Fletch replied. "We just have to make the most of them when they come." He looked at Torres. "Detective, would you be willing to remove those handcuffs? I think we can trust Officer Paulson to make better choices going forward." Torres hesitated, then nodded, stepping forward to unlock the restraints. As they fell away, Paulson rubbed his wrists, looking lost and somehow younger than he had that morning. "Dr. Martinez has a session opening at 4 o'clock today," Fletch said, checking his watch. "I'll call ahead if you'd like to take that slot." Paulson picked up the business card with trembling fingers. "I'll go, I promise. For Tommy, and for all the veterans I wronged." He looked up at Fletch. "How do you do it? Carry all that weight and still find room for kindness?" "The weight gets lighter when you share it," Fletch answered. "That's what Tommy would want for you. Not to carry his loss alone, but to honor his memory by helping others carry their burdens." Evelyn watched as understanding dawned in Paulson's eyes, not just acceptance of help, but the first glimmer of hope she'd seen in him all day. In that moment, she truly understood what made Fletch a hero, not just his actions in combat, but his endless capacity to see the humanity in others, even those who had wronged him. 2 weeks later, the federal courthouse's main hall buzzed with anticipation. American flags lined the walls, and rows of chairs filled the marble space. Veterans in dress uniforms sat alongside police officers in their blues, while reporters positioned their cameras near the podium. Detective Oliver Torres adjusted his tie, glancing at his notes one final time. The story of how Colonel Fletcher Hawkins had saved his life was etched in his heart, but today he wanted every word to be perfect. Judge Martin Reeves stepped to the microphone, his judicial robes replaced by his old military dress uniform. "Today, we gather to properly honor a true American hero," he began, his voice carrying through the packed hall, "and to demonstrate our renewed commitment to treating every person who enters these doors with the dignity they deserve." In the front row, Evelyn Moore sat beside Fletch, who wore a newly pressed uniform that replaced his threadbare jacket. She had spent the past 2 weeks working late into the night, preparing the paperwork that would change veterans' lives forever. Torres approached the podium, his hands steady as he gripped its edges. 23 years ago, in the mountains of Afghanistan, I was a scared 19-year-old kid trapped in a burning helicopter," he began. "Colonel Hawkins didn't know my name, didn't know I dreamed of becoming a police officer, didn't know anything except that I needed help." He paused, meeting Fletch's eyes. "He ran into that fire 6 times, saving every single one of us. The titanium fragments in his leg today are his medals from that mission, earned with blood and courage." The audience sat transfixed as Torres continued, describing how Fletch's example had shaped his own life of service. In the back of the hall, Kevin Walsh and the other security officers listened intently, their new training badges gleaming on their chests. "Starting today," Torres announced, "every security officer in this courthouse will undergo sensitivity training focused on treating veterans with respect. Because sometimes the biggest heroes walk through these doors wearing civilian clothes, carrying memories instead of medals." Judge Reeves returned to the podium, holding the Medal of Honor in its blue velvet case. "Colonel Fletcher Hawkins," he called out, "please step forward." Fletch rose slowly, his bad leg stiff, but his bearing straight and proud. As he stood before the judge, the morning sunlight streamed through the high windows, catching the medal's gold surface. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty," Judge Reeves read, his voice thick with emotion, as he placed the medal around Fletch's neck. The applause was thunderous, but Fletch's eyes sought out Evelyn in the crowd. She nodded, clutching a thick folder containing the documents that would ensure his legacy continued long after today. Later that afternoon, at Arlington National Cemetery, Fletch knelt carefully beside the first white headstone. The late autumn wind rustled through the endless rows of markers as he gently removed his Medal of Honor. "This belongs to you too, Jimmy," he whispered, placing it against the cold marble. "You showed me what courage meant that day." Torres stood quietly behind him, holding 5 more identical medals, exact replicas of the original, commissioned by Judge Reeves. They moved from grave to grave, Fletch speaking softly to each fallen soldier, sharing the honor with those he couldn't save. At the last headstone, Evelyn waited with a leather portfolio. Her smart business suit replaced her usual public defender's attire, representing her new role as founder of the Fletcher Hawkins Veterans Justice Foundation. "The papers are ready, Colonel," she said, opening the portfolio to reveal the legal documents. "Judge Reeves's endowment will fund free legal services for veterans for the next 20 years. We'll have offices in every major city by next spring." Fletch traced the letters on the final headstone with weathered fingers. "They'd be proud," he said quietly. "Not of the medal, but of what it's being used for." He looked up at Evelyn. "You're giving up a lot to run this foundation." She shook her head, smiling. "I'm not giving up anything. I'm finally doing what I always wanted, making sure justice serves everyone, especially those who served us." Torres stepped forward, placing a hand on Fletch's shoulder. "The first training class for courthouse security starts Monday," he said. "Every officer will learn about Operation Silent Thunder, about the cost of service, about looking beyond the surface." Fletch nodded, his eyes moving across the sea of white headstones stretching to the horizon. "That's how we honor them," he said softly. "Not with medals or ceremonies, but by treating each person who walks through those courthouse doors the way these heroes deserve to be treated." Evelyn held out a pen, pointing to the signature line on the foundation documents. "Ready to make it official?" Fletch took the pen, his hand steady as it had been in that burning helicopter 23 years ago. His signature was firm and clear, establishing a legacy that would touch thousands of lives. As the autumn sun began to set, casting long shadows across Arlington's hallowed ground, the 3 of them stood in silence. The Medal of Honor glinted on the final headstone, a symbol not just of past courage, but of future promise. Through the Fletcher Hawkins Veterans Justice Foundation, through Torres's training program, and through the changed hearts of those who witnessed true heroism, the ripples of one man's quiet dignity would continue to spread, transforming lives long after this day. If this one resonated with you, stick around. I've got another story waiting for you tomorrow. And who knows, it might be just what you needed to hear.